My name is Sid Haas. I'm the Vice President of Business Development here at LKCS, and I want to welcome you to today's webinar focusing on meeting ADA web guidelines and what that means and how we can, how we approach web guidelines. So for those of you not familiar with LKCS, I have the one obligatory slide. We've been working with financial institutions since the early 1960s. We provide a wide variety of services. We've been really focusing on working with data for the last 15 or 20 years and using that data to improve our clients' marketing efforts across all channels, whether that's print or web, a variety of electronic channels or even statements. So you can see that on here. But obviously today's, we're going to be focusing on our web development services and primarily what it means to be ADA web accessible. So we talk about web accessibility. Obviously, what we mean is that we want to make sure that people with disabilities can use the web. So that means that all users must be able to perceive, understand, navigate, interact with, and contribute to the web. And primarily that websites must provide equal access and equal opportunity to people with disabilities. And there's all sorts of statistics, as far as how many people are disabled, but it's actually quite a bit of the U.S. population. I believe that the last numbers I saw were 1 in 12 people had some kind of, were considered to be disabled. So when we talk about web accessibility, it sounds easy until we realize how people with disabilities use the web. And we're going to be talking about this obviously in much further detail, but it means that we have to ensure that, all sorts of assistive devices that different, people with different disabilities use are compatible with our websites. So that includes people that can't use a keyboard, or people that can't hear, or people that don't have good use of their motor function, so they can't use a traditional mouse, things like that. And what does that mean for how, people can interact with and contribute to our websites? If you go to this link down at the bottom, there's actually really good short videos on each of these that really give you an understanding of what people with these different disabilities deal with on a day-to-day basis when it comes to actually working, and using websites online. Same thing is true, when we talk about accessibility and how it actually improves the usability of websites in general. So not for people who are necessarily severely disabled, but we also have to realize that everybody coming to our website, not everybody is equally tech savvy, or financially literate. So we need to make sure that we provide clear notifications and feedback on our forms. We want to have, and we'll talk about this again further, but we want to make sure we have friendly and clear error messages, when people are filling out a form and we need more information. We want to make sure that we have colors with good contrast. Obviously we want to make sure we have a clear layout and design, and we want to have content that's understandable. These are actually all part of the web guidelines, the accessibility guidelines that we're going to be talking about in further detail. So not everything, is for the severely disabled. A lot of things really do make our websites better for everybody that uses them. But obviously, I think the majority of the people that are here today are probably because of, the threat of lawsuits that are out there, and the fact that financial institutions are the most recent targets, of these lawsuits. And these threats begin with a demand letter, claiming to have identified access barriers on a website. We've helped several, financial institutions nationwide that have received, these threat letters and, seeking settlement offers. But these letters seek a settlement agreement, which includes obviously an award of attorney's fees and the costs, to plaintiffs, and obviously a web accessibility compliance plan. How are you going to bring your website, how are you going to make it accessible? And the goal obviously is for you to reduce your litigation risk, and our recommendations to help you do that are first to be proactive, take action to address your web accessibility issues now, and we're going to talk about what that means and how you do that. But don't wait until you receive a demand letter. Obviously doing this after you receive a demand letter is not the way, not the best approach. it's going to be much more effective for you, to deal with this ahead of receiving one of these letters than after you do. And one of the keys, and again, we'll talk about this further, is to implement an ADA website accessibility policy. So if you haven't read about what these policies are, it's a policy that you're going to adopt that affirms your commitment to compliance, basically states that you are or are, seeking to be compliant with, these web guidelines that we're going to talk about. It provides for training of the appropriate people, that are responsible for your website. It provides for management oversight, and it provides for ongoing accessibility monitoring and auditing. And there's, several examples of accessibility policies that are out there now. I see them on more and more of our clients' websites, and I'd be happy to even send you kind of a template that you can use as a draft of your own accessibility policy. So you'll actually see my contact information at the end of the presentation. But if you send me an email and just ask me for a copy, of our web accessibility template, the policy template, I'd be happy to send that to you. I should preface the fact that I am not an attorney, and I do not want to be an attorney. So I certainly, invite you to customize the language in that policy and have it reviewed by your compliance people and your attorneys to make sure it's appropriate. But I think you'll see as we go through that it should meet your needs. So when we talk about compliance and what it means to be compliant with web accessibility, it's important to understand that the Americans with Disabilities Act does not directly address website accessibility. It does not include any technical standard for determining what compliance is when it comes to websites. The Department of Justice is responsible for enforcing the Americans with Disabilities Act, and the DOJ has held that the Americans with Disabilities Act requirements are not limited to just physical places, so that they would also apply to websites. And this has held up in some courts, as we'll talk about in the next few slides. Everybody is waiting for the Department of Justice to issue a technical standard for web accessibility. That's not expected until the earliest next year. We all know how slow the government can act. So, there's no guarantee that they'll even issue anything in 2018. But, I guess all of the pundits, all of the different sources of information that I follow and that I've read have indicated that the Department of Justice will issue some kind of standard and make this some kind of true compliance, requirement or a law sometime in 2018. It's important to note, though, that there are practical standards for web accessibility today that we can follow. And this became even more apparent just in June. There was a federal court ruling on June 12th that I feel is very, very important. Not just me, but a lot of people in the industry feel is very important, and we want to discuss it during the webinar today. So the case was Gill versus Winn-Dixie Stores, Inc. So Mr. Gill is a blind customer, and Winn-Dixie is a chain of grocery stores primarily in the South, the Southeast U.S. Mr. Gill, I should point out, has actually filed several lawsuits. So it wasn't just the Winn-Dixie store chain of stores that he filed suit against. They were just one of them. But it's also important to note that under the Americans with Disabilities Act, there are no damages that Mr. Gill can be awarded. So he wasn't doing this for monetary gain. He's not going to get a penny unless he has some kind of, backroom deal with his attorneys. But, he's not in this for monetary award. But Mr. Gill is blind, and what he found was that he could not renew a prescription through the Winn-Dixie website. And that was his basis for filing suit. And this was the first federal court order that was issued for a web accessibility violation of the Americans with Disabilities Act by what's known as a place of public accommodation, by a public business. not by a government agency. That's what makes it important. It's the first precedent of a federal court issuing a ruling against a private business, and not a government agency. The judge cited the Web Content Accessibility Guidelines as the standard for web accessibility. These are the guidelines we're going to talk about in much further detail, and they're the guidelines that most people expect the Department of Justice to adopt as their standard for web accessibility. But again, the Department of Justice hasn't actually taken that action yet. So they still haven't acted formally. There's still no law. But the judge's ruling has set an important precedent, one that we feel obviously is going to be followed. And there are many, many pending lawsuits to be heard in federal courts nationwide. And I believe that they're going to follow suit with this judge's ruling in Gill versus Winn-Dixie. The judge went on when his ruling, I think, has some very important points that I want to discuss in the webinar, and that is that in addition to paying attorney's fees, again, there's no damages that are going to be paid to Mr. Gill, but obviously the judge did order Winn-Dixie to pay all the attorney's fees, and he ordered Winn-Dixie to make their site accessible. Winn-Dixie was ordered to set deadlines to do the following. First was to adopt a website accessibility policy. So this was one of those recommendations that I had already mentioned to you. But he had ordered them to adopt a web accessibility policy which ensures that its website conforms with the WCAG, or Web Content Accessibility Guidelines, criteria. We're going to be going through those in significantly more detail in a few minutes. He ordered them to publish a statement of this web accessibility policy to their website, along with a means of submitting accessibility issues and questions. And again, I told you that I can send you a template for this web accessibility policy, and that template includes, ways that your account holders can contact you and let you know of web accessibility issues on your website. This third one is really important. One of Winn-Dixie's arguments in the case was that their website relied on a lot of third-party vendors, and those third-party vendor integrations weren't web accessible. And the judge basically said, in his opinion, too bad. You select your third parties. You need to make sure that those third parties have their components of your website be compliant with web accessibility by a date. He didn't say what date that had to be. It didn't have to be next month. It didn't necessarily have to be next year, but he's requiring Winn-Dixie to specify a date by which any third-party vendors who participate on its website will be fully accessible to the disabled. Why I think this is extremely important to all of you on the call is when it comes to your online banking vendors and other vendors that have significant integrations into your websites. I know I have, and I know many of you have probably talked to those vendors. And personally, I have yet to hear of a date from any of the major online banking vendors by which they are going to be web accessible. And that's something that I think is going to be a big problem, especially with this judge's ruling. So I highly encourage you to contact your vendors and ask them when, and get it in writing, they are going to have your online banking sites, their mobile sites, all of those different websites, that integrate with yours, the mortgage bot sites, all of the different sites that I'm talking about, when they are going to meet these WCAG criteria. Really important, and it was a specific part of the judge's ruling in this case. He required Winn-Dixie to set a date for when they would provide mandatory web accessibility training to all employees who develop or publish web content. So they're web programmers, they're people who contribute content, anybody who's editing web pages for them, all of those types of things. He expected them to have some kind of training on web accessibility. And he expected Winn-Dixie to conduct automated web accessibility tests at least quarterly. We'll be discussing that as well as we go forward. These recommendations are all things that we think you should consider implementing now. They're all things that we think are going to be, they all make sense, in my opinion. They're all things that don't come at an extremely high cost. They're all manageable. And they're all things that you can do now to stay ahead of both potential legislation and obviously the threat of these lawsuits that are out there. So let's dive into these web content accessibility guidelines and what these mean. So the Web Content Accessibility Guidelines, or WCAG, you've seen these initials now several times in my presentations, are currently up to version 2.0. They were developed by the World Wide Web Consortium, otherwise known as W3C, which is a well-known organization that sets standards for web content and web programming languages and all sorts of other things. And these aren't new. So while, even I, for example, haven't known much about web accessibility up until about 1.5 years or 2 years ago, this current version of the Web Accessibility Guidelines, this version 2.0, has been out since December of 2008. So these aren't a new set of guidelines. It's just new to us, new to you. But these WCAG guidelines are organized into 3 levels of conformance. There's a level A, which is a very basic level of web accessibility features. There's a level AA, which basically includes all the level A requirements and builds on it with some more, with some additional requirements. And there's a level AAA, which is the most complex level of web accessibility. And it's really primarily meant for sites that serve the disabled community. So when we talk about these 3 levels, it's really level AA that should be your objective when it comes to meeting these WCAG standards. So meeting the WCAG 2.0 level AA standards should be your goal. And by the way, that's already the standard by law in the United Kingdom, Canada, New Zealand, and Australia. I have a feeling again that this is where, the Department of Justice, I believe, is heading, but they just haven't issued that ruling yet. So when we talk about the Web Content Accessibility Guideline principles, the criteria are divided into 4 key principles. The first one is that your website must be perceivable. It ensures that users that are disabled, or anybody for that matter, can perceive the information on your website. It recognizes the fact that some people may have difficulties with one or more of their senses, making them rely on different assistive technologies to browse your site. And the 3 main senses that these guidelines help with are sight, hearing, and touch. So people that are having trouble with their sight, with their hearing, or with their motor functions, basically, these principles are going to help them use your website. And the way they do this, there's a few key areas. This isn't going to cover all of the guidelines, but to give you a few key areas. First off, we're going to provide text alternatives for non-text content. What that means is when we're showing images on a website, we're going to have a text description of what that image is. So an image alt tag for those of you that are familiar with HTML coding. We're going to provide captions, audio captions for multimedia, like video transcripts. And just so you know, YouTube and Vimeo will actually create audio captions for you automatically. They're not perfect, but they're free. There are also paid services, professional services that you can use. But there are free options if you have access to the raw video files. We're going to make sure that we can create content that can be presented in different ways so that screen readers and other assistive technologies can actually interpret your websites without losing meanings. Basically, we have to make sure that the site's coded with the proper HTML tags to be read properly. So if you've ever listened to a web page being read by a screen reader, it's a little bit eerie, and sometimes the screen readers actually read the information out of order just because of the hierarchy of the coding on the back end of the web page. So we actually need to make sure that things are coded properly so that the hierarchy of headings and body content is maintained properly. And we need to make sure that it's easy for users to see and hear content. So again, we need to make sure we're using the appropriate use of color. Contrast ratios is a big deal between, foreground and background colors. And we need to make sure that text links make sense when they're read out of context. Because again, like these screen readers don't always read things in the proper order. So they might read a link without reading the information around them, as an example. So things like having click here isn't necessarily good enough. Click here to apply is a better use of a text link, as an example. So this is just a few examples of what it means in the WCAG criteria to make your website perceivable. The second principle is that your website must be operable. It's about the actions people take when browsing your website. So we need to make sure that user interface components and navigational elements are created in a way that everyone can use them. We don't want to limit the use of your website to people that use a mouse. Not everybody uses a mouse. The majority of people do, but not everybody does. Some users have motor difficulties, which means they use a keyboard to navigate. Some users who have sight impairments prefer to use a keyboard rather than a mouse as well. So we need to make sure that all functionality on your website is available from a keyboard. Believe it or not, all of your browsers, the ones you're using right now, have the ability to navigate your website with a keyboard. It's not easy. It's not intuitive for those of us that are used to navigating with a mouse. But you can literally tab through every link, and on your website. It's a challenge. It's a challenge. People that are disabled, I give them a lot of credit because that's what they have to deal with. But we need to make sure that the website is, again, designed and coded properly to be able to be navigated with a keyboard. We want to give users enough time to read and use the content. So if you think of banner ads, for example, that rotate, or content that scrolls, anything that's animated, we need to be able to give people control over that timing, to be able to pause maybe those rotations or slow them down or adjust it so that they have time to read and understand it, and not just basically accept the timing that we've given them. We need to make sure that content doesn't cause seizures. We kind of goes without saying, but there's a lot of stuff out there, at least there used to be a lot of stuff out there that moved very quickly and flashed and, had a lot of fast motion to grab our attention. And that caused a lot of issues for people. So again, we need to make sure that we're cognizant of that with any designs that we're putting out there. We need to make sure that we can help users navigate and find content. So we need to have a sitemap actually accessible from every page of the website. Sometimes our navigation menus are not that easy to use, again, with a keyboard or with these screen readers or other assistive devices that we've talked about that some of these disabled people have to use. So a sitemap on every page makes that easier. It's easier for them to tab or use a pointer or something to go through a sitemap than it is maybe to access a navigation menu. The third principle of these WCAG guidelines is that our websites must be understandable. We have a website that our users can perceive and that they can operate, but it doesn't mean anything if they can't understand it. So again, this is one of those things that, makes a website better and easier to use for everybody, not just those with disabilities. But your website must use clear language and have simple instructions and explain complex subjects. So we need to make sure that your website functions in a way that everybody understands. Again, we need to avoid unusual or inconsistent user interfaces and navigation schemes. So it kind of overlaps a little bit with the operable principle, but we need to make sure that text is readable and understandable. So we need to minimize jargon and acronyms, and we know in the financial industry that we're really good at jargons and acronyms. We're full of them. We need to make sure that, we offer adjustable text size. So we need to give users control of making text larger or smaller on the website. We need to have consistent navigation, between pages and between sections of the website. We know people basically don't want to have to relearn where to find information on the site. And we want to make sure that we can help users avoid and correct mistakes. This is especially true when it comes to filling out online forms on your website or applications. So we want to have labels on our form fields, and we want to have, again, user-friendly error messages. So if there's a field that's required and they don't fill it in, we pop up a nice friendly message as opposed to something that's difficult for them to understand. And we want to have, give them a confirmation of when a form was submitted correctly. There was a question that came in about when the DOJ releases the requirements, would they give a window for everyone to become compliant? I hope so, but I don't know. I mean, I wish I knew the answer to that. I mean, I would expect that there would have to be some kind of date in the future that those requirements would become effective, but I'd hate to say that for sure and be wrong. So I don't know. The fourth principle of the WCAG guidelines is that your website must be robust. And this really goes back to the programming and the back-end coding of a website. But a robust website, is one that different technologies can rely on. So again, we're talking about different web browsers and different screen readers and different technologies. And it's really about the website meeting recognized standards and just using clean programming, actually following best practices for HTML and style sheets and different things like that. It just minimizes the risk of your website visitors using some type of technology that can't correctly process your website. So it's really about maximizing the compatibility with current and future tools. And it's really about just proper coding and standard HTML and just making sure that the developers and the programmers that are working on your website know what they're doing. So when it comes to evaluating web accessibility, what we've found in our recommendation to you is that you need a tool to scan your website. It's very difficult, even for the people here that are really good at it, to just look at a web page and tell you if it meets these web accessibility guidelines or not. There's literally hundreds of guidelines, that make up those four principles. I went through about 20 of them with you. So you need a tool to scan the site, but it's not that easy because even these automated tools, which again was one of the judge's recommendations, as you remember, they're really good, but many of the guidelines need to be verified manually. So an example, and one that we talked about, was these alt tags on these images. So we talked about how, somebody that might be blind or has, a visual impairment might not be able to see an image. So we have an image and we give that image a text description. But and a computer, or a computer program can see that we have the text description in place, but it can't tell if that text description adequately describes the image. So it really comes down to a person looking at the image and looking at the description of the image to determine if that description adequately describes the image. So some of these tools are free. There's two examples that are on your screen now, and some of them aren't. There are several subscription-based tools, and there's more of them coming out probably that provide additional benefits. So when you look at what tool you want to look at, some of them offer full site scanning as an example. So those free tools on the left will typically scan one page at a time, where some of the paid tools will scan the entire website. The paid tools will offer some kind of reporting, typically. So they'll give you a report on all of the issues may be found in the entire site. They'll be able to do automated scans. So again, you can set up a schedule for them to scan, and they can send you an email alert if a page or multiple pages have accessibility issues. But you also have to beware, because some of these can get fairly expensive. And again, in my opinion, so you kind of have to do a little bit of research and compare and contrast the different tools that are out there. So I'll show you a couple of screenshots from the tool that we use, just to show you what's available and what you might want to look for. So to give you an idea of what an accessibility scan looks like. So this was a scan that was completed. This scan found 13,524 accessibility issues. Some of you are probably groaning. I can tell you that it's actually a very low number. So when we scan a website, that's actually a really good number to start with. When we first start on a web accessibility project, we've seen sites with 10 times that many errors, well over 130,000 errors. So, our accessibility issues. So this number should not scare you. This is a very manageable number, and I'll explain how as we go through here. What's important to note is that this tool and most of the tools will typically break these issues down into what's known in this case as errors, warnings, and review items. Errors are typically items that are very likely to be out of compliance, right? They're very likely to be violations of the accessibility guidelines, things that you need to fix. Warnings are things that most likely need to be fixed, but there's some wiggle room. There's some room for interpretation. There might be some things that when a person looks at them, a web developer or a web designer looks at them, they can say, yeah, but this really doesn't need to be, this really isn't an issue, and here's why, so we don't need to fix that. And the items that need to be reviewed will make up the majority of the issues found. And those are the items that I talked about where the computer cannot make that determination. Those are the items that a human has to actually review, each and every one of those items. And you will see that those items that need review make up the vast majority, in this case, of those 13,000 items. Less than 600 of the items are things that will actually need to be fixed for sure. The rest of the items are all items that will need to be reviewed. That doesn't mean they don't need to be fixed. Some of them will need to be fixed, but most of them just need somebody to go through and look at them and determine what needs to be fixed and what doesn't. The other thing is that these items typically will appear on multiple pages as well. So if you look at them once and fix them once, you can clear multiple issues at the same time. So you can actually see that here. So what you're seeing here is kind of a summary, and it'll show you, each issue and how many pages that issue was found on. It might be found multiple times on each page, but this is just a different way of looking at that same information. So I can see some of these issues are only found on one page, but other issues are found on 54 pages, 56 pages. And I can obviously, if this was a live, I'd be able to click on these links and see which pages they were and where on these pages they were and things like that. But again, I can see the classification, which ones are bugs and which ones are items or errors, and which ones are items that need review, which ones are warnings, all of those types of things. But as we go into it, this is where I can actually see where these issues are found. So if I was the web developer actually clearing these errors off, I would actually be able to see exactly on which particular page and where in the code this exact issue was. I'd actually be able to view the source code. I'd be able to view the line of code that had the issue. And what's key about most of these, at least of the paid tools, but even some of the free tools, is that in this one, I have this ability to open what's called the Accessibility Help Center. So I have what the actual requirement is of the accessibility, the WCAG guideline is, but that may or may not make sense to me. I can get an explanation of it right from within the tool. So what that means is that I can actually get a plain English description of every one of these accessibility guidelines. I can get instructions on how to repair them, and I can get specific steps on how to check them, and I can even see exactly what code passes or fails each one of these guidelines. And I can get this type of information for every one of the accessibility guidelines. So as I go through my scan results, I can see exactly what needs to be fixed, and I'd actually be able to go right to those pages, see if I can fix it or not, see if, I actually fix it. And then I could actually mark that item as reviewed, and it would clear it off of the report. And that's where you'll start seeing, these check marks as things that have been fixed. And I'd be able to rescan the site, and it would go through and actually verify that the items were properly adjusted. So a question came in asking what tool we use to show in the sample. We use a tool, but it doesn't have so clearly an explanation of yours. Can you give me the name of the tool and the link? So this is a tool that we resell. I'd be happy to get you some information. Just shoot me an email, and I can get you more information on the tool. But this is a subscription that we offer, through LKCS. But this is, this type of help. This is one of those things that as you start comparing some of these tools out there, this is what's really, really helpful. Because you want to make sure that your web designer or the firm that you're using to correct these issues has the information that they need to fix them. Because the fact of the matter is these guidelines are not the easiest thing to understand. They're just not, and they require a lot of time and training and just experience working with them to get up to speed. I forgot this slide was in there. I apologize, but this is an example actually of the code samples that are provided in our tool as well. So this actually shows you what passes and fails for each one of those guidelines. So again, for your web developers working on this that understand the HTML code, they'll actually be able to see the difference between what passes each one of the guidelines and what fails. So when it comes to fixing these accessibility issues, as I've said, your web developer is likely going to need to do some research. It takes longer to understand many of these requirements than to fix them. Our team here, our guys, have been doing this now for about 18 months, so they're pretty good at most of the requirements. They go through and they can fix a lot of web accessibility issues pretty darn quickly. But if you're new to it, that there's a lot of this research, and having these types of explanations and examples is very, very helpful. Most of the items when it comes to web accessibility are small and relatively easy to fix. But as I've shown, there's just a lot of them. When you're presented with a scan and it shows that you have 10,000 or 20,000 or 100,000 issues on your website, it's pretty daunting. And how do you start to knock them off? But like I said, if you've got 50 or 100 or 200 pages on your website, and you start knocking them off, and if you knock off things that are in your templates, for example, you might be able to knock off 50, 100, or 200 of them at a time by fixing items that are on every page. Those numbers can start to drop fairly quickly. There are some larger issues that can take significant time to correct. If you don't have a sitemap on every page, for example, or, you do have to adjust your navigation menu. There are some things that are bigger gotchas. And when it comes to videos and multimedia content, obviously if you have to add, captioning and things like that, those are things that can take additional time and cost, to work on there as well. So the question is, should you even fix your site? And that's not necessarily as easy of an answer as you may think. So, from our experience, again, it depends on the size of your website, but the typical financial institution websites that we work on take between 30 and 50 hours to actually fix and make accessible. So money talks. For us, 30 to 50 hours is, $4,000 to $6,000 typically. So is your site due for a redesign? Is it old or outdated? Is your site responsive? If it's not mobile friendly, should you take that money that you would put into making it accessible? Because any new website that's developed now should be web accessible from the beginning. Are you able to manage and update your site as easily as you need? If the answers to these questions, are indicating that maybe it's time for a redesign, those are things that you just need to consider, because that money that you're going to be spending on making your site accessible can be put towards that redesign, and any new site redesign should be accessible from the get-go, if the developer that you hire knows what they're doing. And then obviously the issue is maintaining web accessibility. So if we go back to that judge's opinion in the Winn-Dixie case, he ordered Winn-Dixie to set up quarterly automated scans of their website. Web accessibility is not a one and done kind of project. With today's websites and the content management systems on the back end and how easy it is for you to update and edit content and add pages to your website and add graphics and all of those things, it's really easy. They're just great. But now websites are updated by people that may not be aware of the accessibility requirements. So this is where the training comes into play, and the automated scans come into play again. You need to make sure that your site is audited on a regular basis, either by an experienced web development agency or by somebody knowledgeable at, your bank or credit union. And again, this is where some of those subscription-based tools make sense, so that you can set up a schedule where the site gets scanned on a monthly basis or a quarterly basis, or, at the very least, a semi-annual basis, depending on how often you make changes. Obviously the Winn-Dixie site is probably a larger site than many of your sites, so I don't know if a quarterly scan is even appropriate. Many of our customers have semi-annual scans done on their sites. So it just depends on how often you're making changes to your sites, how many pages are on your sites, those types of things. But we can help you get an idea of what we feel is appropriate. And you also have to be aware that the WCAG standards are going to change as well. I mentioned that the WCAG 2.0 standards were developed in 2008. 2.1 standards are already in draft status. They're going to come out. Now, I've read them. I didn't have a chance for today's presentation to actually show you some of the changes. Most of the 2.1 standards are the same as the 2.0 standards, but there are some new ones. So as soon as those new ones come out, that means that you're going to have some additional requirements that your website's going to have to meet. So there's going to be some changes, that you'll have to update. So again, any of these tools, they'll be updated to meet the 2.1 set of guidelines once those come out, and the next scan that you get would then show what changes need to be implemented to meet those 2.1 set of guidelines. So just so you know, LKCS obviously does offer web accessibility services. We have the ability to help you identify, resolve, and monitor your website for these types of issues. And we actually have 3 levels of service, with each one available on a one-time basis or available biannually, quarterly, or monthly. So I'll go through these, and I'd be happy to get you pricing after the call, but after the webinar. But we do offer a reporting only solution. So if you just wanted to get a baseline of how well your site meets those WCAG guidelines, these reports will show you how many pages have potential accessibility issues and what those issues are. But I do want to caution you that these reports do not give you all the information you need to actually fix the accessibility issues. So they're solely designed to give you a baseline of where the site stands in relation to the WCAG guidelines, but that's it. So if you just need to report to the board or to your CEO or just to verify that, the web design firm that you work with is doing a good job and your site meets the guidelines, then the reporting is all you need. But if you think that, that the site is going to need some web accessibility work after that, then I wouldn't necessarily only limit to the report. So the second level is online access. So this is where we actually give you web-based access to our accessibility tool. Those screenshots that I showed you, you would actually have access to the same tool that our web developers use when we're working on sites for our clients. And it's the same tool that generates these reports. So this will actually identify exactly which pages are affected, what elements on those pages are problematic, and it'll, again, review the specific guidelines for each item, show you those code examples that meet the guidelines. And it's really designed for your web developers or your designers to go through and make changes to the site as they review those accessibility requirements. So, if you have somebody with basic knowledge of HTML and that ability to edit the site's content and the back-end programming, or you work with a web development firm, but they just don't have their own tool or, know what to do for web accessibility, online access is a tremendous solution. We've worked with many of our customers and their firms that they work with to give them this access. So in conjunction with multiple people, they can get it done on their own. And then we offer a full service approach as well, where we can scan the site and make changes to your website to get it to actually meet those 2.0 guidelines. And then we provide reports of the web accessibility both before and after those changes were made. And again, we can do that on a one-time basis, or we can do it, on a quarterly basis, semi-annual basis, or monthly basis if you need us to. And that's all the information that I had for you. So I'll be happy to stay on the line and answer any other questions that come in. I again want to thank you very much for your time. I hope that it was valuable information for you. Thanks very much.